Hello everyone and welcome to the Libra Cup 2.0 guide. The Libra Cup 2.0 takes place at the Oka show and is a 1600 meter mile course. This makes it a standard distance course with firm conditions, cloudy days. It takes place during the fall. It is on the Hanshin race course, which is a right-handed course. Now, this course is one of the recently updated maps here, and as you can see, this is a very interesting map. So, right off the bat, the final spurt will start on a late race corner, which is also the final corner. The interesting thing about this map is that there is a downhill which covers about 400 meters between the mid-race and the late race. So the downhill starts here and ends here. Additionally, there's only one uphill that takes place in the late race. For the kind of universal inheritable accelerations here, we of course have our tried and true angling and scheming and let's pump some iron, which requires 1st and 6th place respectively. This course also enables us to take Budding Blossom, which is the Nishino flower unique, which procs between 3rd and 4th. Notably, this skill will also only proc if you have been engaged in a challenge on a mid-race corner, which means that you do have to be next to an Uma at any point during these corners here. Shooting for Victory will also have some carryover on Taiki herself, but does not actually work as an inherit because it will be too short, so do not inherit Shooting for Victory onto any Uma. Additionally, Moving Past and Beyond also does not work, so do not inherit that onto any Uma. Now, another interesting thing about the Hanshin 1600 is that a final straight starts about 60 meters after the late race begins. This means that straight accels can work, but will be a little bit less effective because they are delayed. You can still use straight accels to supplement an accel package and to give yourself a little bit of insurance on hitting accelerations. For example, Victoria por Plancha can be taken on a front because they don't really have very many other accel options. It is a 0.1 on a 60 meter delay, which feels kind of bad, but it is more effective than weaker velocity inherits could be on fronts. Give Mummy a Hug takes place from 2nd through 4th. I don't really recommend trying to slot this into your inherits because Pace Chaser kind of just have better options. Enclosers can also take Straightaway Spurt and Encroaching Shadow, which again will be delayed, but not so much that it is completely useless. And the TLDR of CM18 is that everything works. Every position has acceleration options. No position is dead, and every position can and has won so far in rooms. I have seen lates, ends, paces, fronts, and even runaways win in room matches. So it is a very open meta where you can really force your favorite Umas or your favorite position and still have a very good shot at winning, which is great. It's really nice to have kind of a breath of fresh air after more recent CMs. Now, I think that a lot of people know that if there is a downhill on a course, your stamina consumption will be reduced. So you can estimate less stamina on courses with downhills, which is great. However, I think that this course in particular is a little bit deceptive because the downhill here takes place over the stretch of mid-race converting into late race. What this means is that your Umas are likely never going to stam out on the Hanshin 1600 course. However, their spurt rate might actually be more reduced than you think. This is because at the beginning of the late race right here, your Uma is going to calculate her spurt speed based on the stamina she currently has. And so she will conserve a little bit of stamina on the initial part of this hill, but then when she hits this mark right here, she's going to start calculating her speed based off of her current stamina. She doesn't know that she is going to conserve more stamina on the rest of this downhill, which means that in terms of calculating how fast she is moving for her spurt, this part of the hill right here is the only thing that's going to matter. What this means is that you have to be really careful when you are having a lower stamina because you want to make sure that you still have a high enough spurt rate. So with maps like this, your spurt rate is going to be a little bit lower than your survival rate. And if you want your Uma to perform at her best, then you want to make sure that she has a spurt rate of about 95% or higher. This also means that stamina debuffs such as Mystifying Murmur comps are not quite going to be as effective because you're not really going to make an Uma fail to survive this course, but you might reduce her spurt rate by a little bit. It's not going to have as drastic of an effect as stamming an Uma out on the Oi 2000 race course would be. Now for the fun part, the downhill here means that some skills are actually very viable and can be very strong due to potentially being able to carry them over. Downhill Speedster is a 0.15 velocity over 2.4 seconds that you can get in a White Spark, or you can get if you are camping Dobra, Yukino Bishin, or Steampunk Winning Ticket. This is a skill that has a chance of carryover, which is always going to be very strong. Additionally, Determined Descent is a Pace Chaser only 0.3 acceleration that can be found on the Nishino Flower Wit card, and this is an acceleration that can be very strong on this track, especially if you hit it at the right time. Both of these skills are going to be random based on where you are in the downhill, but they both have a chance of hitting very effectively. Camping Dober also has a unique that will hit perfectly here. Wherever this wonder leads has perfect carryover for Camping Dober only, which makes her a very strong pick on this track. However, it is important to note that wherever this wonder leads does not work when it is inherited. This skill is going to end its duration when it's inherited just before the late race starts, so that is not going to give you that very strong carryover. Now, I actually think that wherever this wonder leads is still actually a decent inherit for forcing overtake targets right before the acceleration phase. This helps you to push ahead and try to find that overtake target so that you can instantly hit leap forward when that late race starts. And I'm going to be going into leap forward in a lot more detail here later in this video. Still, even with that in mind, wherever this wonder leads should be at a grandparent slot at the very best. I don't think that you want to make this into your main parent, especially because it does not have that velocity carryover when it is inherited. So now let's talk about Umas based on position in our comps. Runaway is going to be very viable in a team comp. Runaway can block angling and scheming Excel from fronts, which makes them really strong for countering fronts. You can also try to use them to help to buff your own fronts, but you need to be a little bit careful that they don't just completely block your own Umas from being able to win. I have seen Runaways win in rooms. It's usually a little bit rarer to see a Runaway win, but they do have win equity in the CM. The major advantage to a Runaway is that they are going to stretch out the lobby quite a lot, which is going to buff pace chasers in particular, because Runaways can steal the angling and scheming proc, and they will also push pace chasers back into their acceleration slots. Pace chasers also benefit from the stretched out lobby because they are going to be the ones trying to close the gap soonest. This will help pace chasers defend against late surgers and end closers in the final stretch. For fronts in general, fronts should all try to take Speed Eater if at all possible. It is a very strong debuff, particularly when it's stacked. This is generally how fronts are going to help defend their positioning against backliners. Multi-front comps can deny Budding Blossom slots, and if you are running a Runaway in your multi-front comp, you can even inherit Budding Blossom to try to use that acceleration. Additionally, the Taiki Speed card is very strong if you do happen to have a free card slot. It's not going to be better than some of Marzensky or just the scenario buffs that Agnes Tachyon Speed gives you, but it can be a nice supplementary slot. Fronts are not as reliable as they used to be, but they are still pretty strong. I think that fronts were actually hit pretty hard by the PDM nerfs in the 7.1 patch, and so now any meta where pace chasers are good makes it a little bit harder for fronts to just have a straight sweep. I've seen a lot of pace chasers overtake a lot of fronts in rooms, and while I do think that fronts are very strong and they do have win equity, it's not going to be quite as like quote-unquote free to just build good fronts and then have like 80% win rates. You have to really be more conscientious and try a little bit harder, and you might still not have quite as much success as we used to. Now, fronts will always take angling and scheming. They can also take Victoria por Plancha, which is that 0.1 acceleration that hits about 60 meters late. However, I do think that it is stronger than it seems on paper, especially because fronts don't have many other options. You can take a skill like Second Wind, but you have to make sure that you're able to stand for it. Now, fronts can also take the usual Operation Cacao and Kiss for Courage combo. The combo here is that both of these are mid-race skills, and the very small heal in Operation Cacao will fulfill the preconditions for Kiss for Courage. If you are running front comps, I would say that you should try to have a backup plan for if you are entering rooms with Runaway and you're not running one yourself. So pace chasers are actually in a very good spot in the CM. They have a lot of accessible acceleration options and a lot of mid-race options due to running the Tachyon Speed card. Multiple pace chaser comps can be viable, and solo pace comps can also be pretty viable just to round out a composition. All pace chasers do want to inherit Budding Blossom on top of their other accelerations. Similar to CM18, both Nishino Flower and Taiki Shuttle are very strong again. Both of them have very strong 0.4 accelerations. Additionally, Flower gets an extra boost due to having Determined Descent in her kit, so she is able to hit that downhill acceleration on top of her natural 0.4. This makes Nishino Flower a very strong pace pick for the CM. As a note, you can use the Nishino Flower Wit card to also learn Determined Descent, but do keep in mind that it's only a 0.3 as opposed to the 0.2 of straight descent. This is a little bit weaker than most gold acceleration cards. However, I do think that the extra 0.1 of acceleration is worth the SP as long as you aren't giving up anything too major for it. You can also try to take Neck and Neck, which is a 0.4 but is on a worse card. So generally, pace chasers have the option between borrowing Nishino Flower Wit or borrowing Daiwa Scarlet Power. Both of these have accelerations that are a little bit random, but not really what I would consider like full-on gambling on this track. They're both generally going to hit at a pretty good time more often than not. The thing here is that we definitely don't want to use both of these because that's kind of over-indexing on our gold accelerations. And if we're choosing between them, then I do actually think that Flower Wit is going to be a little bit easier to run than Daiwa Scarlet Power. Wit cards in general are just easier to slot into your deck in Grand Concert because you just have a little bit more flexible options when you're going for the double Wit clicks or the triple speed clicks. This does also make Umas with neck and neck in their base kit pretty strong, such as Wedding Findmo or Camping Taiki Shuttle, because I do think that this makes them more flexible since they don't have to even consider running the Daiwa Scarlet power card. Pace Chasers can also take Head On, which is the white version of neck and neck and is a 0.2 acceleration. I do recommend trying to take Head On if at all possible, because it is a very strong potential acceleration for Pace Chasers and can help to propel them forward. Now, Lates will still take advantage of the On Your Left buff. The On Your Left buffs have basically catapulted Lates into always being viable on pretty much every CM. Lates also now have access to Leap Forward or Lightning Surge, which I'll go into here in just a second. They can also take Let's Pump Some Iron. Now, positioning is a little bit awkward here because lobbies are less predictable. In CMs where, quote unquote, everything is good, anything is good, everything is viable, it's harder for Umas that require specific acceleration slots, like 6th place, to reliably be able to predict how they're going to hit that 6th slot. Do you run more front runners because you anticipate a backliner heavy lobby? Do you run more backliners because you anticipate a front heavy lobby? It's a little bit difficult to really figure that out when the meta is so open. This means that positioning can be awkward, and even if you take Let's Pump Some Iron, you can miss it in a lot of lobbies. Just like in CM18, I think that late surgers should definitely consider taking Budding Blossom, which is the 3rd and 4th acceleration. Even if they hit this a little bit late, I think it will still be viable, such as if they're in the acceleration phase, passing the Uma in 4th place, and then hitting 4th place and proccing Budding Blossom. Now, the Daiichi Ruby card, which releases today, is an option to pull for backliners on sprints and miles. The Daiichi Ruby card does have Lightning Surge as the gold skill, which is a gold acceleration skill for sprint and mile. This skill basically says if you are in the process of overtaking from 5th place or below in the late race, you will get acceleration. This can typically insta-proc excel due to how overtake mechanics work. You can be in an overtake if you are just slowly moving up on an Uma in front of you. Now, I do think that this is a very strong skill. However, I also think that power cards are just clunkier to run in Grand Concert. You can kind of compare this card to the Daiwa Scarlet power card for neck and neck. I don't really think that Daiwa Scarlet power is always the best option to run in an ace deck because power cards in general just feel kind of clunky. In Grand Concert, you really are punished for not stacking up multiple cards that can rainbow on the same facility. Because of that, I don't really think that this card is going to solve problems that late surgers might have. I think that it might actually make it harder to build late surges if you're building aces. But that being said, if you are willing to tank this power card into your deck and try to high roll a backliner, I do think that it is very viable and it can result in a very powerful Uma. My recommendation for late surger mains is to not really overinvest in this banner. You can always borrow it for parent runs. I do think that a strong leap forward legacy is going to be easier to work with than trying to slot a power card into sprint and mile CMs, especially now that On Your Left has actually been buffed really early. Nice Nature Wit plus a leap forward legacy is going to be really strong, and I do think that it will result in aces that are a little bit less high rolly to build and can be just as strong, if not a little bit stronger in stats. Now, with end closers, I actually think that end closer mains in sprint and mile might have an easier time justifying Ruby because end closers don't have access to On Your Left. Ends can also take Let's Pump Some Iron more safely just due to the fact that they will naturally be positioned further back than late surgers. Ends could also take Budding as a good insurance for heavy debuff lobbies that will push them more forward in the lobby. Straightaway Spurt is going to hit about 60 meters late, but it's still going to give some acceleration, so I do think that that is an option for end closers to take. End compositions might have some difficulties catching up to Runaway lobby frontliners, and this is because a lot of pace chaser mains could be running Runaways in order to buff their pace positioning, which is going to separate them further from end closers. If you are running debuffers, they can help to push your end closers up while also slowing down the frontliners. You could also try to run a Runaway yourself and plan for it in your end closer build by running a lot more wit and mid-race. This can help to counter fronts, but it will buff pace chasers, so you do want to be a little bit careful of that. End closers can be very flexible in your team comp to try and reach various acceleration positions. As a note, because this is a corner 4 map where Spurt is viable, the Taishan double debuff comp is a composition that runs 2 end closer debuffs and pushes Taishan to 7th place minimum so she can hit Nemesis on corner 4 with carryover. Nemesis will give her the ability to velocity bomb that final corner and push into pump or budding slots. This also gives her the opportunity to use leap forward. She then chains this into encroaching shadow with that final straight and she becomes very strong. This is the main reason why Taishin was so strong in CM14. It's back, it's functional, and it can be very, very powerful. Christmas Ogre Cap also works in the CM as an end closer due to After School Stroll, which procs Festive Miracle with perfect carryover. Now, this is not going to be as oppressive as it was in previous medium CMs because this Christmas Ogre does require end closer sparks, and she has to learn After School Stroll. The stamina advantage that she gains is not quite as strong on Mile. This will make it easier for Christmas Ogre to have that full spurt, but not necessarily as powerful as it is on a medium track. On that note, hypothetically, mile courses are where velocity debuffs are now strongest. This is because Keen Eye hits naturally in the early race, which means that Dominator is the only gold skill that 564 can proc in the late race. This means that you are more likely to hit both of your Dominator level debuffs and be able to get that double Dominator with one Uma slot. However, in the CM, I think that there's enough variance that running debuffers does have an opportunity cost. Debuffers are usually at their strongest when they're able to assist an Uma that has kind of an unconditional win condition. When they're able to assist an Uma that is otherwise very consistent and very strong, then they really help to catapult that Uma. For example, Christmas Ogre Cap in CM17. However, CM18 doesn't really have a position or an Uma that is like that. You can definitely run that double debuff comp, particularly with Umas like Taishin or even like Nishino Flower, but because you can still miss your acceleration positions and because there are a lot of other options and a lot of variance in lobby comp, it's not going to be as sure of a bet as it is when you are banking on debuffers for an Uma like Christmas Ogre Cap on a medium CM. I'm not saying it's not good. I do think that it is very good, particularly because you can choose just to run one debuffer, but I do think that it is not going to be quite as strong as some people are afraid of it being. The TLDR in CM18 is that everything can be good. This does make lobby compositions a little bit less predictable. This also makes this a great opportunity to run your faves or try and run some fun cooks. I do think that this is going to be a real breath of fresh air CM after CM17, and I really hope that everybody can have fun with it. The only thing to note is that you do want to be aware of the long downhill. You want to understand how it affects your skills and your stamina calculations in order to have the best possible final spurt. As an added bonus, I have been getting a lot of questions about Fuji versus Ballroom Fuji for this CM, and so I wanted to talk about her just a little bit because she is viable. Fuji Kiseki is never going to be the best option in a composition, but she is always going to be a solid one in mile CMs. OG Fuji is a mile specialist. She has 1 mile gold and 2 mile whites in her base kit. This makes OG Fuji very flexible. She has front C and late C, meaning that she can shift very easily to a front runner or a late starter position in order to round out a composition. She is a great Uma to put into a comp when you need kind of a warm body that can also win. However, OG Fuji Kiseki also needs all of her acceleration to be inherited or given to her in some way. She doesn't really have any acceleration on her own. For Ballroom Fuji, she is actually a pace specialist, not a mile specialist. So Ballroom Fuji does have Head-On and Speedstar naturally in her kit. Additionally, she does get right-handed in her career for free, which is a speed green. Speed greens are very strong now that we are overcapping speed. The thing about Ballroom Fuji is that she needs a lot of mid-race because you want to proc Ravissante early. Her unique is a 0.45 velocity unique that can proc on the final corner when she overtakes someone. This can be completely wasted inside of the acceleration phase if you proc it too late on the final corner. So because of that, I recommend giving Ballroom Fuji a lot of mid-race skills, particularly corner skills, which can help her push up and force that overtake as early as possible on the final corner to proc Ravissante. There is actually a very interesting comparison to be made here between Ballroom Fuji and OG Fine Motion. OG Fine Motion gets right-handed and Fall Runner in her kit. She also has Speedstar and can get Head-On in an event in her career. This makes Ballroom Fuji and OG Fine Motion very similar Umas, except OG Fine Motion also has Determined Descent in her kit, which means that she kind of gets an additional gold skill and doesn't have to run that Nishino Flower Wit card if she doesn't want to. This does make OG Fine Motion a little bit stronger, I think, than Ballroom Fuji, but they are very comparable, and Ballroom Fuji has a little bit better growths, I feel, so don't be afraid to run her. When comparing both OG Fuji and Ballroom Fuji, I think that they're both very good options, and I don't think that either of them is stronger than the other. It really just depends on if you're looking for a pace specialist or if you're looking for a more flexible Uma. OG Fuji is going to have more mid-race in her kit, but Ballroom Fuji will be able to velocity bomb on that final corner and can be very, very strong if that carryover hits perfectly. Again, Fuji is never going to be the best option, even in a mile CM when she is a mile specialist, but I do think that she is a very strong one. If we're putting all of the strongest Umas in the CM, such as Nishino Flower, into S tier, then OG Fuji I think is going to be at least A tier. So definitely consider running her if you have her, if for no other reason than just the absolute aura she gives. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.